But I think one of the common misconceptions about the Malaysian market is that I think there's 39 to early 40s amounts of e-wallet licenses or e-money licenses that currently exist in Malaysia. How many of those have been handed to a startup? Do you know?
No idea.
A startup that's not a corporate spin-off. I challenge you to find one. And you know why that's interesting? Because if you look at the unicorns all around the world.
Are you the one?
We would love to be the first one. And there'll be a number of businesses that have an e-money license that say, hey, we're a startup too. How would I define a startup? I define a startup that's a business that's been around for less than 2 years, that's been created and applied for that license to start something new, that's not a spin-off or an investment from an existing company. So why is that important to Malaysia to promote startups? I think it's important for two reasons. One, I can't think of a single unicorn around the world, so a business over $1 billion that's private, that's ever come from a corporate spin-off. Can't think of one. So if all of the licenses in Malaysia are going to corporate spin-offs, what are the success or the chances of a Malaysian business being the next unicorn? Hard to say. The other challenge is, if there aren't enough startups with e-money licenses, then for the Malaysian community, for the budding entrepreneur of Malaysia, for the developer in Malaysia that has a dream of creating his own businesses, how are you giving them some success stories to aspire towards? So for MyMy in Malaysia, we're deliberately trying to make and ensure that 100% of our operations is based in Malaysia.
Hi everybody, welcome back to the Startup Zone, episode 17. I'm your new host, Harith Bakri. I'm here with a special guest who is no stranger to banking and the finance industry. He has been in the finance since 2006. Initially, he was started in the trading investment. After that, he went on to be the youngest state manager and also the top performing for Commonwealth Bank. And I think it's regarded as the youngest state manager in the Australian history. Meanwhile, after that, he was then head of sales and partnership for the largest Australian unlisted FinTech. And then he was then a key member of the leadership team for AirwallX, where he managed to be involved in the largest Series A and also the first investment that got funded by.
It's a good intro, man.
Yeah, but it got funded by the we got Sequoia and Tencent.
Yeah, look,
yes. And also
there's a number of really big investors in AirwallX over our time there. So we had certainly Sequoia. Yeah. We had Tencent. Yeah. We had we had Mastercard. We had a really exciting VC from Australia that's got some really fantastic entrepreneurial leadership across it called SquarePeg. So a huge list of very exciting investors. I think 4 weeks ago they just received the unicorn accolade as well. So it's great to see the business going so well. Really proud of the guys there.
So now, this is Joe, who is now a CEO and also co-founder of MyMy.
That's right. So MyMy, we're a Malaysian majority-owned and operated FinTech. Our ambition is to become the world's first Sharia-compliant challenger bank, and ASEAN's first neobank as well.
Yeah, because I saw that the Bank Negara Malaysia was paved its way for neobanks and also allowing like the foreign neobanks also to come in, like Kakao Bank, also Revolut, also. I think there's several one also, even my Big Pig was one of the competitors in the neobanks also. Yes, but before we talk about it, why do you start in Malaysia? Why not in Indonesia? Because they have like the larger market.
Yeah, look, it's a really good question, and it wasn't a decision that we made lightly. So one of the reasons why Malaysia is because My co-founder Kishore is Malaysian, and our chairman Tunku Ahmad Bahanuddin is, a very highly regarded banker in this space. So, while I am the CEO, I'm just one of the co-founders in this business. But the driving reasons of why Malaysia over Indonesia to build the world's first Sharia-compliant challenger or neobank, it's really a matter of timing. So when we started this, if you were looking at it without much of an industry knowledge or knowledge of the region, Indonesia would be the obvious choice of where you'd want to start. Really because Indonesia's got, a 270 million listed population, but, unlisted probably close to 300 million people. So an incredible population and wide market for you to go after and start. But when you delve into it, Malaysia, from a timing perspective, was perfectly ready.
Yep.
And at that time in Indonesia, still the biggest selling phone was BlackBerry. So what makes Malaysia a really unique market? Firstly, as you've seen from these, recent announcements from Bank Negara, the central bank is very pro-innovation. And so that makes a really big difference when you're trying to build something that's incredibly innovative. The other factors are that changing customer behavior is one of the hardest things that you can do as a business. And if you look at the Malaysian population, there's nearly everyone has a debit card. I think it's 1.5 debit cards per person. Everyone has a smartphone in Malaysia.
Yep.
And I think Malaysia's the number one in the world for Instagram usage, so they love their smartphone. But when you compare those stats from a payments perspective to Australia or the UK, there's a vast difference. Even though everyone has a debit card and everyone has a smartphone, there's a vast difference in the amount of digital payments compared to cash. So Australia, I believe the numbers are about 97% of payments are digital. Most of them are just tapping the card and NFC. And Malaysia, when we got here, it was about 10 to 12%. So we thought this was probably the path of least resistance, where you had everyone with a card in their pocket, a phone in their pocket, and a huge gap in terms of where the digital payments infrastructure lies, and that's something that we wanted to solve.
So yes, about that thing is that how do you see yourself for Malaysians actually being a cashless society? Do you see it in the upcoming 5 years or 3 years or somewhere in the next 10 years? Because I see that China has is synonymous with the WeChat Pay.
Yeah, look, China's by far the leading place on the planet for FinTech, in my opinion. You look at what WeChat, what Ant Financial are doing. They're 5 years ahead of all of the American tech players that have had all of the advantages in the world to be first. The first digital bank in the world was called X.com. It was created by Elon Musk, and the PayPal founding group, X.com, became PayPal. They're known as the PayPal Mafia in Silicon Valley. Those guys now run or are highly influential in nearly every startup and unicorn in Silicon Valley. So it's amazing that they started in this space, and since then there's been very little innovation that's come out of Silicon Valley for payments. Whereas China has really gone leaps and bounds ahead. That, in my opinion, doesn't really mean that the way that China has adopted digital payments is going to be the same as what happens in Malaysia and the ASEAN region. I think that China's a really unique case because it was a captive market, whereas Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, all of these countries are quite disparate, and the geography is really challenging. And so what that means is, if you were to come in and try and create a QR code solution across all of those regions, it's not as straightforward as in China jumping on a bullet train with the sales team and acquiring all of the merchants. There's 27,000 islands in ASEAN, 7,000 islands populated with people. How do you get around and win every one of those merchants onto a QR code? Now, while Grab and Gojek are doing a really good job of acquiring an OFO and a number of those businesses in Indonesia, I actually think that ASEAN will move the way that Europe and Australia has done, and that'll be that merchant terminals, maybe in a newer form, but certainly debit cards and using your phone on the Visa and MasterCard rails will probably win out over QR codes because of the payment ubiquity. because that you can, as a startup like myself or like some of our friends in the industry like Big Pay and Merchant Trade, you can immediately from day one have 39 million merchants plugged into your product just by jumping on those Visa to MasterCard rails, and that makes a material difference to how you get started.
Interesting. So let's talk about your expertise, since you are familiar yourself with banking and finance. What's the main challenge in fintech for Malaysia or Asia Pacific actually?
There's probably two questions there. One is, I guess, as you mentioned, my experience in banking. So I've started my career, as you mentioned, banks on trading floors, trading foreign currency, interest rates, doing institutional sales. Then I moved over to the technology side. So I was very fortunate to run the transaction banking division for Commonwealth Bank, which is the biggest bank in the Southern Hemisphere, for about 2 years as well. And so, and then post there, obviously moving on to Airwallex and now MyMy. So I sat on both sides of the fence, and I can say that really, and it sounds really cliche to say it, but there's not too big a difference between the ambitions of the banks and the ambitions of the fintechs. What both of us are trying to overcome is the shortcomings of a cash-based economy. So really cash is the enemy. But there's still a lot of friction between banks who are trying to protect their patch, inevitably, and fintechs that are trying to win an element of market share. So, often it's one of the questions that gets posed to me is, are banks and fintechs friends or are they competitors? And there's probably no black and white answer to that. If you look at, I think some of the interesting things that people forget is that banks have always relied on fintechs for innovation for the last 50 years. If you look at the 1970s, the major innovation for banks was cross-border payments, and they outsourced that to SWIFT. You look at merchant acquiring, you have Verifone, you have Ingenico, you have merchant terminal providers, you have software that sits in between. Banks have always outsourced that to other providers. And then you look at, ATMs, so people had cash withdrawals and all of those sort of products, have always been outsourced. And those businesses, Visa, MasterCard, SWIFT, they're the original fintechs, right? So why all of a sudden now is there this concern from the banks around the competition of fintechs? And the answer to that is that back then, fintechs were happy to white label their technology to a bank to provide a solution and make a small percentage or clip the ticket as the transactions come through. With the advent of the internet and this accelerating pace of innovation we're going through now, if you as a fintech deploy a white labeled solution of your technology to a bank, by the time it reaches all of those customers of the bank, it's already going to be out of date, right? So the only way that fintechs can ensure that they can stay ahead of the curve and be competitive is to own that customer experience. And this is where the challenge lies with banks now. Banks spend a huge amount of money investing into trying to remain innovative, but they've had 100-year history of huge walls or barriers to entry that have stopped them, and the leadership structure of these banks doesn't really allow them to innovate at the rate and the pace of change of fintechs. So, to answer your question about what are the challenges to the Malaysian banks and the industry here, I would say that banks go through 3 phases. They all go through each of these phases, and the ones that get to phase 3 fastest will be the ones that win. So every bank around the world is dealing with this problem with fintech right now. The first phase they go through is, let's build an innovation lab. We're going to build the tech ourselves. We're going to make this beautiful office. We're going to get really smart people to build stuff in there. And what actually ends up happening is they built this beautiful location that ends up just being a place that they take their corporate and institutional customers through on a bit of a museum tour to show them how innovative they are. Now, every bank's been through that, and it's not a bad thing. It's a natural way of them moving towards innovation. but no innovation comes from an innovation lab. I'm yet to hear of a product that's ever come out of an innovation lab that's been successful. The next phase that they go through is that they say we're going to build an incubator, because the space, that innovation lab, hasn't been used for a year. So they say we're going to bring in lots of fintechs and we're going to build products for the bank here, and then we're going to give it to all of our customers. But as we just talked about, no fintech wants to give the client-facing side to a business which can't keep up with innovation. So the risks and opportunities for Malaysian fintechs is getting to phase 3 as quickly as possible, and that is building an independent venture capital firm that can invest in fintechs, that can acquire small stakes in businesses that are doing really innovative things, that can learn about what's happening on that precipice, the cold face of innovation, and should those businesses get big enough and be successful, acquire the whole thing and bring it in-house. And I think if you look at the businesses that are doing this best around the world, it's certainly not any of the Malaysian banks right now, and that makes it a really big opportunity. But Goldman Sachs have really led the way here. You look at what they've done. They've made, I think, 19 investments this year in fintechs. And if they were to just acquire all of those businesses, which would be a fraction of their potential investment spend, they could acquire all of those businesses in the next 3 years, and they would probably be the biggest bank in the world in terms of customer base and global reach. So what is the challenge facing banks in Malaysia? It's how quickly can they get to phase 3?
I see. So speaking of that, actually, do banks or traditional banks actually outsource by organizing hackathons to find ways on innovate in a subtle way?
I think hackathons is one of those things that happens in phase 1 of their innovation, and I'm yet to see a great product that comes out of a hackathon. So, I've judged a lot of hackathons. There's definitely a place in the ecosystem for hackathons. That place, in my opinion, is around providing opportunities to early stage developers to network with senior business leaders and find opportunities for jobs. But a hackathon is about breaking something and building something within a matter of days. It's not around strategically planning on how you can solve this conundrum that banks sit in right now around how they're going to act and acquire customers and generate revenue in 5 years' time. And I think if their approach to hackathons, if their approach to that innovation is this hackathon right now, I would very much doubt that those businesses will be the same as they are with the same sort of influence in 5 years' time.
Okay, cool. So yes, let's talk about MyMy actually. You have interesting individuals also, like Jenna, who is the top 100 women in FinTech.
Yeah.
Samuel, who's been familiar with top financial institutions also. He's been involved in Khazanah, and also the notable mention also is Alan Goodwin, who is the first one who introduced the prepaid card in Europe.
Yeah, look.
What was it like working? Firstly, how do you find them actually, and also how it's like to be working with the great minds?
So, building a business is really hard. The chances of any technology company like ours succeeding is extremely low. And I think that while you can have a really good idea, if you don't have the right people around you, then it's probably going to amount to nothing. We've all had a great idea that we've never executed on, right? So building a business like ours requires, really the only thing that you can pick to look at which of those companies is going to be successful is the quality of the team they put together. So that's been our focus from day one. Do we have the right tech talent to build bank-grade infrastructure to build a product like this? First priority. Do we have the team around us that can take that from ideation and proof of concept through to customers really engaging and loving the brand and the functionality and what we're doing? So you're right, we're really lucky to have, as you mentioned, first of all, a great chairman in Tunku Ahmad Burhanuddin. Tunku's been in the banking industry for a really long time. He's received some very exciting offers from some very senior banks in Malaysia over the last year and a half. But for him, coming towards the end of an extremely successful career, He sees MyMy, particularly around the Sharia component of what we would love to bring to market over the next 12 months, as a chance to build something from scratch. And that's a once-in-a-lifetime chance. So we're very fortunate to have him on board. He's very active in the business. As you mentioned, Alan, who is one of the oldest, youngest faces, but oldest heads in the industry, we'll say like that. Yes, he issued one of the first prepaid cards in Europe. He's one of the great minds behind how to create a multi-currency product.
Awesome.
And he gives us that card level expertise, which I don't have. I didn't have when we started. We've got Kishore, who speaks 6 languages, has had a stellar banking and marketing career in Malaysia. You mentioned a couple of the things that he's done, who provides the real on-ground local expertise of defining who our customer really is, and building our product to fit that market space. And of course, last but not least, Jenna, who was the only Malaysian ranked in the 100 most influential women in fintech. Look, there's many more that we could talk about, but the goal for our business was that we wanted to build something from scratch. We wanted to leverage the expertise of all of the best people that we knew around us. And just as important, we wanted to build a Malaysian fintech and Malaysia's first unicorn. Because you look at one of the things that appeals to me in Malaysia most is it's probably the most democratic country in the world right now. I come from Australia, where we've had 6 prime ministers in 5 years, which is a little bit embarrassing, but you look at the progress that's happening in the economy right now, you look at the incredible talent that's available here, and then you look at the job opportunities for very talented programmers in this country. And while there are a lot of big tech companies that have spaces here, a lot of it's really operational. So our ambition is that we want to put Malaysia, and particularly KL, on the map as the center of fintech for ASEAN. We're going to have over 100 engineers on board within 18 months to 2 years of this project kicking off, provided we get our regulatory approvals in time. And we're going to bring in a couple of industry and world-leading experts to upskill the local team here, so that we can do the start of building an ecosystem.
Interesting. We wish the best for that. And so speaking of that, your ambitions for MyMy is to be the first or one of the earliest for the Sharia-compliant. And what are the misconceptions actually, and how do you break that stereotype actually?
Look, the Sharia component and being the world's first Sharia-compliant challenger bank has been a dream of our chairman Tunku Ahmad's for a long time. And so we have established a highly regarded committee of experts that help us put together what Sharia actually means when you're talking about digital financial services. And the answer is that there's no black and white rules around what we need to do for this product. But we do, and I think this is the core tenet of Sharia products, is that it has to all be based around ethics. So we have a really fantastic committee that have been with us from the very beginning, evaluating each stage of our product. And that's really essential, because if you're building a product that is Sharia compliant, it can't be something that you've just spun from a conventional product and applied a label to it. I think it's an unethical and the wrong way to do it. It has to be something that's been done from the ground up. What those components are, I'd love to tell you now, but it's a little bit top secret and part of the IP of what we're bringing forward. But we're really excited to have such a powerful committee of experts in that space, that really are having that one chance in a lifetime to build something right from the beginning.
Interesting. So yes, since you are also been entrepreneur since at a young age, so what are the challenges that you face as the first time entrepreneur actually?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'd say to anyone, I think all of us have entrepreneurialism in us. Everyone would love to have their own business, no matter what scale. An entrepreneur doesn't need to be the CEO of $1 billion tech company. The entrepreneur can be the owner of a beautiful restaurant that makes something exquisite that we, crave and dream about. There's entrepreneurs all around us. But what I would say is the most important 2 things about entrepreneurship is one, you have to endure it first before you can enjoy it. And that endurance is really difficult. You know, most people realize how hard it is and decide that it's not for them. And that's actually okay. I feel like there's a lot of pressure in society for people to say they want to start their own business, they want to be an entrepreneur. I think that, you know, there's only a small percentage of people that, one, have the risk capacity to do this. You know, I am a single guy, no kids, and I'm 100% financially invested into this one business. So I have a singular focus. But a lot of people that have a young family, the risks, I think, are far too high. And I think it's okay to call out that you're happy to work in a business and add value as an intrapreneur as opposed to an entrepreneur. So I think, you know, that's really the first challenge is, you know, do you have the ability to commit 100% to it? And if you don't, it's okay. And there's plenty of great people that are required for entrepreneurs like me to build a business.
So yes, do you face any kind of failures actually in the process of becoming an entrepreneur, or even before starting MyMy actually?
I've had a number of business failures over the time, and you know, it sounds a little bit cheesy to say it, but I think that when I look back on those most difficult times in my career to date, it's probably what's propelled me to the next level so quickly. So, you know, having that senior leadership role in a bank, still in my 20s, was rare and unheard of at the time. Being the global head of sales and partnerships for what is now a unicorn at 31 is very, very rare, and it's actually all of the failures that I had that led up to that got me to that point. So, you know, sometimes you win and everything's great, and instead of saying sometimes you lose, I'd say sometimes you win and sometimes you learn.
Yeah, sounds great. But yes, from that journey actually, from the life of being yourself in this kind of entrepreneurship actually, what's the thing that you are grateful for actually?
I think the most humbling thing about what we're doing is that we've got such an incredible team around us. So many names that I'd love to mention beyond what we just talked about. And seeing the commitment of the business across so many people with so many amazing job offers that they could take any other time for 5 times the money that they get paid here is a really humbling experience. So, you know, to have a dream, to start to execute on something, and have people along for the journey that really become more like family than colleagues. It's a really special thing.
Yeah, obviously, because we have like honorable mentions I could give out to you also, like the previous ones. So starting out for someone like me who's still 20, what are your advice for the young people who like to venture into entrepreneurship or even in fintech? And should they go to traditional banks first and then build up their career from there?
I think what I'm going to say is pretty counterintuitive, but I would say that when you're 20, don't worry about being a successful entrepreneur. It's the wrong way to think about it. You know, when you're 20, what you need to be doing is just trying to get to learn what your skill set is, where your strengths are, and where you need to grow. So, you know, when I was 20, I was petrified of public speaking. I would kind of go bright red, my eyes would water. You know, how could you lead a team or get a team to rally behind you when you can't stand up and command the respect of an audience? So I would say, one, it's about being really honest with yourself at that age, working out where you've got weaknesses and just slowly chipping away at them. The other thing is that I don't think you can define a single founder of a unicorn business anywhere in the world that wasn't a subject matter expert on that industry before they built that business. So, you know, you say, well, what about Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook? Well, he'd already built a number of social networks from the time he was 11 or 12 years old. And so when he saw that opportunity, it was something that he understood really well. if you look at any entrepreneur, they become a subject matter expert in an industry first, and that allows them to spot a gap, and that gap is the business. So for me, the real opportunity was that I'd spent 10 years in foreign exchange, interest rates, trading, derivatives. I knew everything there was about cross-border. And then I pivoted in the bank to the transaction banking side, which is domestic payments, cards, all of these other areas. And what I discovered was that there are a large amount of people in the world that understand everything there is to know about cross-border payments. I was one of them. There's a large amount of people in the world that know everything there is about domestic payments and card schemes and all of that. But there isn't many of people that know both. And if you combine those two together, that's where you see business opportunities. That's what Airwallex is, and that's what MyMy is. They're the outcome of 10 or 12 years of working in an industry, becoming a subject matter expert, and then spotting a gap.
Cool. That's a great advice actually to the aspiring entrepreneurs actually. It's quite good. You have a very well experienced opinion for that. And yes, so we arrived to the conclusion actually. How do you see yourself in next 3 years or 5 years? Do you see MyMy to be the most influential in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, look, there's a number of really exciting businesses in this space. We really love what some of our peers are doing in this space. We really love what we're seeing from Big Pay and GrabPay and Boost, and there's a lot of really exciting businesses happening here. And we all have the same goal, which is changing customer behavior and getting people away from cash. So competition is a really good thing, and we're actually all working together just for a small slice of the pie of what the banks have now. But where I think we're a little bit different is we're at a disadvantage to all of the other players in Malaysia, because all of the other players in Malaysia are the spin-off of a large corporate entity with very deep pockets. So while GrabPay, Grab is a startup in itself, GrabPay is a subset of the Grab business. Boost is a subset of Axiata, and Big Pay, while they stand alone, are a subset of AirAsia. So we're really up against businesses that have got much more cash than us. People would look at that with concern and say, how are you going to compete? We see that, as much as it's a threat, also as an opportunity. We think we have the strongest technical team in the region, and we think that we have a really powerful story to tell around what we'd like to achieve. So, in 3 years' time, what would I like to see for MyMy? I'd like to see MyMy be one of the leaders in the space in helping solve financial inclusion and removing cash from the economy through digital financial services. How do we do that? We're going to do that by delighting the customer with incredible new technology released regularly, as opposed to one of the concerns that I have in the market at the moment, which is the continued push for cashbacks from all the existing suppliers. So our ambition is to be the company known for its ambition, as opposed to the company that's known for handing cash back to try and win the hearts and minds of consumers with money.
So yes, speaking of that, actually, for Malaysians, actually, we have several options, like GrabPay, as you mentioned, Boost, Big Pay, also MyMy. How do you see yourself to get this e-wallet to be standardized? Or is it a good way? Is it a bad thing or a good thing to have a lot of e-wallet actually?
Well, look, I think that there's a really interesting distinction to put down there. So London as a city has about 575 banks, and it's the financial capital of the world. So competition is really good, and the more players that are in the space, the more marketing and investment is going into changing customer behavior, and we love that. But I think one of the common misconceptions about the Malaysian market is that I think there's 39 to early 40s amounts of e-wallet licenses or e-money licenses that currently exist in Malaysia. How many of those have been handed to a startup? Do you know?
No idea.
A startup that's not a corporate spin-off. I challenge you to find one. And you know why that's interesting? Because if you look at the unicorns all around the world,
Are you the one?
we would love to be the first one. And you know, there'll be a number of businesses that have an e-money license that say, hey, we're a startup too. How would I define a startup? I define a startup that's a business that's been around for less than 2 years, that's been created and applied for that license to start something new, that's not a spin-off or an investment from an existing company. So why is that important to Malaysia to promote startups? I think it's important for two reasons. One, I can't think of a single unicorn around the world, so a business over $1 billion that's private, that's ever come from a corporate spin-off. Can't think of one. So if all of the licenses in Malaysia have gone to corporate spin-offs, what are the success or the chances of a Malaysian business being the next unicorn? Hard to say. The other challenge is, if there aren't enough startups with e-money licenses, then for the Malaysian community, for the budding entrepreneur of Malaysia, for the developer in Malaysia that has a dream of creating his own businesses, how are you giving them some success stories to aspire towards? So for MyMy in Malaysia, we're deliberately trying to make and ensure that 100% of our operations is based in Malaysia, for that reason that we want to build an ecosystem and inspire the next generation of Malaysians to found their own fintech.
Cool. Interesting. We wish you the best for that. Yes. How do certain people would like to contact you actually?
If someone wants to reach out to us, look, we're very open for people reaching out to us around job opportunities, particularly if they've got a computer science background. We're always hiring and looking for talent there. For those that are interested in MyMy, you can head to www.my-my.com, or you can check us out on Instagram. Our handle is just MYMY. But give us a follow, register for our product. We'd love to see your feedback once we go live. And so that live date is dependent on Bank Negara at the moment. We're currently in discussions about the best way forward, but we'd hope to be live in Q2 of 2019.
Cool. Wish you the best for that.
Thank
yes,
you.
I also signed up for the MyMy registration form actually. So I hope to be one of the early users for MyMy.
We'd love to have you as an early adopter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you. Thanks for joining us to Startup Zone, episode 17. So yes, it was a great interview with Joe McGuire. It was a lovely session, and please do not forget to subscribe, click the like button, and also please share to your friends that this is the guy who will be leading to the Malaysian fintech ecosystem. Thank you. See you guys. Bye bye.